Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Rules of Engagement Community Critique. This is our 4th episode of the show. We're going to air Community Critique every Thursday, but before we talk about today's episode, let's talk about an overview of Rules of Engagement. Rules of Engagement is a new MLG StarCraft 2 analysis show presented by me, your host, Nick Axelav-Ranish, and it's going to air Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 4 days out of the week, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Every day is going to have a different themed episode. So every Monday we've got Talking Tactics. This is where we look at pro games, we break down the tactics they use, and talk about how those tactics can be applied in other games in general, and maybe even in your regular day life. Developing Fundamentals every Tuesday. This is where we look at the very basics of the game, kind of starting from scratch. So this last Tuesday episode, we talked about, basically how to start an economy, how mining works, how to know how many production buildings you need to get, some micro basics, those type of things, and it's going to build on itself from week to week. Every Wednesday, Mechanics of the Bizarre. That was yesterday's episode. We look at a little bit of crazy plays, like maybe some Mass Phoenixes, some Niduses. We talk about, the ideas behind those builds, why they were used in that circumstance, why they may not be used all the time, or maybe why they should be used a little bit more often. Then, of course, now we're on to today's episode, Community Critique. This is where it's kind of similar to Monday's Talking Tactics, where we kind of analyze games and tactics used, but the big difference here is we use your games back at home. If you guys want your games to be in next episodes or even further future episodes of Community Critique, please submit your replays at majorleaguegaming.com/replays. Also, any questions you ever have, at the end of every show we do a Q&A section. Tweet any questions to me at isaxlav. We'll get to those at the end of this segment. Today, Community Critique, we've got a couple different really great games submitted to me, ready for your enjoyment. The first one is going to be on Daybreak. It's going to be talking about how to do a timing build, but do it with a little bit more patience, not just run across the map and go kill them. It's going to be Tribones versus Complexity's Rise, focus mostly on the Protoss perspective. Then we're going to go to how to break a contain with ACRA Aaron versus Dropkick. And then we're going to go on with basically how to optimize your unit usage as Zerg in Hordeon versus TT Loker. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your guys' names. I'm not expert at internet lingo. And then, of course, at the end of the show, we're going to do answering questions on Twitter at isaxlav. But let's actually take a look at the submission that Tribone sent me about his timing attack. This is what he asked, a little bit paraphrased, of course. The initial build he does is as similar as possible to Partings. He's referring to a 2-base Immortal Sentry timing. But against Zerg, a little clarification there. But the execution is much more patient and drawn out. What should Zerg be doing in these type of situations, as well as anything he could do, the Protoss player, to improve his gameplay? So let's take a look at the game itself here on Daybreak. We'll fast forward to the 10-minute mark. We're going to look at exactly what's happened. He's already crossed the map at this point, and he has an army, 3 Immortals. He was going to have 3 Immortals, 8 Sentries, 6 Stalkers, and 2 Zealots. And the key thing he's going to be doing here is that he's not going to just run across the map. You can tell from his angle. He already came up through this angle on the minimap. We're actually going to cross it up here. And instead of going straight down here for the attack, he's going over the top of the map, right? You're asked, why is he going over the top of the map here? The reason why he's going over the top of the map is because he wants to stay away from the Zerg. He wants to build up a larger army. And this has to do with the build philosophy. So the philosophy behind this build is that you basically want to keep the Zerg on Roach Zergling by threatening to attack them. And then you don't lose any units. It's quite simple. And then as long as Zerg only has Roach and Zergling, doesn't matter how many they have, if your army keeps building up off of an Immortal Sentry Stalker base, you'll get to a certain point, usually around 130, 140 food, where you can beat an enormous amount of Roaches just from the quality of your army. So that's the philosophy. That's why he's moving across the top of the board or the map. Just keep his army just a little bit more safe from units. So now we talk about the implementation of this build. We can see he's reached this point in 10 minutes. Macro-wise, he probably could have shaved maybe up to 30 seconds off that. He could probably be at this section of the map with this army about 9:30. If he moved out maybe a little before 9 minutes, did a warp and on the way, something like that. But I mean, this is still very, 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 very good. Only half a minute off. This is high master level play. And then the other implementation is the part of the philosophy is he can't afford to lose units, right? So from this position, if we fast forward it just a little bit, we're going to look at the way he moves his units around. And there's one thing he does. He moves down here. And he's not planning to attack it because he wants to build up a lot more of a force. So here's one thing I'm actually going to point out on touchscreen really quickly that I think could make the implementation slightly better. So if he's moving now this way, right, he's moving towards the Zerg player. He's moving basically along this route right here. Oops, excuse me, let me bring up the application there. Okay, moving just right around this angle over here, right? But what might actually do him a slightly better option is if he moved along a different angle. So if he moved up over here, right? Now, what's the difference? One, he's threatening his opponent to a smaller degree, right? But if his opponent is only on roaches and zerglings, that's fine. His whole goal is to keep his opponent on roaches and zerglings. He doesn't need to threaten his opponent once he knows they've committed to that path. And the advantage of going along this top path right there is that, of course, if his opponent wants to attack him, instead of exactly switch to different colors, talk about potential Zerg attacks on his force where he might risk losing it. We could have a Zerg army like over here, right? A big Zerg army over here. And then also we could have a giant Zerg arc around here pretty much. Right, so look at all that surface area Zerg could potentially have when he moved down this channel. It's not a horrible situation. The odds of a Zerg being back in this area are very low, so it's not a big deal. But, minor improvements will help. Whereas along here, a potential Zerg army would have to be on this ramp over here, right? That's one potential spot a Zerg could be. Then, of course, they could also be on this ramp right here. Oops. This ramp right here. I guess it doesn't like these the colors to mix too well. So those are the two potential situations where a Zerg could be, and you can see it's much less surface area. So going over the top route is just a little bit safer, but it's a pretty small deal. So let's get back in the game and talk about a little more of the implementation of the build. So now we're over here, and we're going to look at a couple other things. That I talked about how if you moved across the top, it would threaten his opponent less, but that might be okay. And now we're going to ask, why might this be okay to do? And the reason why this would be okay is because his opponent only has roaches and zerglings, and is only making roaches. And you're saying, you know what? How can he know this, right? How can he know his opponent's doing this? And that's a really good question. And the way to answer it is if we look at his build order, his first observer, there's no observers, his first observer is being built right now. He got the 3 mortals first, which you should always do because you got to move out of your base to put on at least the threat pressure. Then he got a warp prism, and then he got an observer. This is the standard partying style one where you want that warp prism across the map as soon as possible so that you can use it to micro mortals when you push your opponent. You don't need it so much for warp-ins. He has got a pylon here. You can warp units without the warp prism, but it's for micro into battle. But he's doing a more patient timing. So he could wait, he'd get the observer a little bit first, right? And then the observer could be in his opponent's base, seeing what they're doing. And then the observer would collect the critical information you need to know how aggressive should he play this timing, right? Should he sit back and be patient, or is his opponent building Mulus, building Infestors, building something that would put him on a timer? Does he need to go and attack right now? So that's a small little implementation change I'd like to see, is just shifting the observer to being built slightly faster if you're doing it with a more patient style approach. And then the last implementation thing is, again, if you're thinking, I'm not going to battle them until I get closer to 120, 130 food, or I'm not going to intend to as long as they're not teching, he should be getting more sentries early, maybe a few less stalkers. Stalkers are better for an immediate engagement, but if you talk to, there's a Zerg player, pretty famous one, very skilled one called Red, and he always talks about a build similar to this, and he says once the Protoss gets to about 17 sentries, the game's over. So the faster you get to that point, the better your odds of victory are, and of course, you do want the Stalkers eventually when you do engage, but if you're going to get both, you'd rather get the sentries faster, just go sentries out, and then later go Stalker, because of course sentries will have more energy when you finally engage. So it's a slight little implementation difference I would choose for myself. But let's actually go see at how this build plays out for him. We're going to slow it down a bit and just try to follow the action. So we can see he's actually, again right here, I mentioned about the different space. It's a pretty big space here. Not quite ideal for him. And he's having to use some force. So it's not training bad. He didn't lose a single unit. So it worked out well. But, if the Zerg had a few more Zerglings positioned to flank him, he would have had to use even more force fields. It basically is an unnecessary attack if you're using the build philosophy of the patient timing, right? Which he's actually starting to do a little bit more aggressive of timing here, which I'm a little worried about, right? He's deep on creep, and he has not too many force fields. So this is the point in the game when the Zerg, even with the amount of units they've lost could be close to being maxed. So this is a point where if the Zerg had multiple forces really, really well positioned, now the Zerg's actually doing a good move on the flank, but of course that's a very small flank. So he's totally fine here because almost the whole army was on one side and not set up for a really strong flank. And the push is going to work out okay, but again, I think it would have been a little better to play a little more passively if you know your opponent is just sticking on Roaches and Zerglings. There's no rush to attack. And then from here on out, now he's going to back up, get himself back in a sweet spot. In fact, up the hill will be even better. There's no need to really push the issue. In fact, he's got to wait for all the creep to go away before he gets in and feel really confident anyway. The Zerg's going to try to push the issue a little bit because now the Zerg's getting confident in this giant open area, right? So the Protoss wants to hang on top until they rebuild their sentry count. And that's going to take a little bit longer now because he has less sentries. And the sentry energy has been drained a bit, so he's got to play a little more passively. So let's fast forward to where he feels comfortable enough to do another engagement. Just a few more warp-ins. See, now he warped in 5 more sentries. So he's up to not quite the 17 instant game over point, but this is, 14 sentries right here. But if you look at most of these sentries only have 1 force field. So 14 force fields is a lot. Actually, that one doesn't even have one. So he probably has about 14 force fields at his disposal. And that sounds like a lot, but really, if you're stuck in a flank, you need to put on 5 or 6 on each side. That means you have 5 or 6 on each side, and then when those go away, you're done. No more force fields. So that can be a little bit problematic. We're going to see how it works out for him, though. And of course, at this point, his Zerg will be maxed. This is the point where your army should be invincible to Roach Zergling. But unfortunately, his sentries are a little bit low in energy. So after these force fields are going to wear away, the Zerg is going to be able to close in here. Only 2 force fields, and he's going to take a little bit more damage than he would like. He's still going to come out slightly on top here, though, right? These Immortals are doing a great job of fighting another warp in here. He's going to barely beat this Zerg army, but he's taken pretty substantial losses, right? He's down by a significant amount of food. In this one, he has to back away because a speeding reinforcement would just totally end the game here. So he's got to play a little more carefully. Looks like he's going to come in again with some Zealots to tank. But I would like to see him back up now. I don't think he could, against speed roaches, it's a little bit dangerous to be out here. So now he's going to back up here, and he's going to wait for some more reinforcements. And this is the point where now he's got about a couple minutes left. Well, more than that, sorry. The Zerg has a couple minutes before the Protoss can attack him, because Zerg Roach speeding reinforcements will beat Zealot stock reinforcements. The Protoss has to rebuild their sentry energy before they can go back again. And this is the problem with those earlier engagements, not preserving and not getting the sentries faster, and then also fighting a couple battles a little bit unnecessarily too early, I guess you would say, a little bit too early, earlier than you want to, and then his sentries were low for energy for that future engagement. And this is the point where the Zerg could be building, they could switch to Infestor Spinecrawler, right? A Zerg with 63 drones could probably turn 10 of those drones into build an infestation pit, then build 10 Spinecrawlers. And it's going to be very, very, very hard to break that. And then, of course, even if there aren't 50 drones, you're still going to end up being ahead of you. So this is a danger zone. Or the Zerg could be, attacking Tunneling Claws. So the next battle, you're in trouble because they can burrow into your force fields. In this case, though, as long as they're just staying on Roach Zergling, you're fine. But as soon as you're forced back, that gives the Zerg the breathing room to tech. And so, that's a situation you don't want to have happen. In this case, it's going to work out okay. But that's a potential implementation of the build you might want to improve a little bit. This battle right there, that's the battle that happened a couple minutes ago. At 14 minutes, that's the battle that you need to win the game at, or you're aiming to win the game at. And so you want to have a little more forceful energy when that battle comes into play. From here on out, though, the Zerg doesn't end up teching. He's just going to end up running into force fields for quite a while. Tribones is able to close out the game with a victory, and it works out great for him. So let's actually take a look at some of the scorecard of the things he did very, very well, and the things maybe he could have used a little bit of improvement on. So overall, the macro was very, very, very good. 10 minutes he was out the front. 13, I think it was 13:30. He was doing that 140 food push about. So overall, really well done. But could have played a bit safer with the units, so he wouldn't have had to use so many force fields earlier on, and his later push could have been a little more stronger, maybe a game-ending push. Could have gone the Observer before the War Prism, so he would know if his opponent is trying to attack, and then he knows he has to attack a little bit faster. Then also could add a few more sentries earlier. All those are minor details, though. Overall, a great game and a really interesting build philosophy behind the Mortal Sentry. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with your next section.